So what I was going to do is just talk about a couple of things that we do in my day job, focused on SDGs, and then through that, unfortunately, to add some more provocations for you to think about in the roundtables later. But first up, I mean, my introduction to the SDGs was sort of end of 2015, 2016. We were working with the GSMA. That represents the mobile operators worldwide. That industry was, arguably still is, going through a bit of a reputational challenge. It was, I think it was one-off banking at the time, globally, in terms of reputation. And somebody came in there, somebody who come from Dell, and wanted to change that brand, the brand of the overall industry. Used a purpose vehicle to do that, so connecting everyone and everything to a better future. And it had two pillars, and one pillar was to stand up for the SDGs and explain how the mobile industry, and we've already heard a little bit about that industry, impacts on the SDGs, and the other bit was more internal around sort of the way that you respect and nurture your customer, your client. So we worked for a year on that program, really, really interesting, and the sort of two key bits that we did, one of which was a report, and I wish we had a little bit more collective intelligence then, because this was done largely by hand and spreadsheets, but we tried to map the SDGs to target level all the way through to across 90 countries and 50 to 60 different indicators of the mobile industry to try and understand the impact, baseline it, build a synthetic index. And then the second thing was to create some interaction between the operators who don't typically work particularly well together to focus on some social good. And the one we picked out was epidemics and the spread of epidemics, and we kicked off 3 country trials. So anyway, through that, got to love the framework, understand it, love the passion of the people involved in the framework, and also understand the incredible communication power of that framework and indeed its complexity. So over the last 2.5 years, tried to take that to market in various different ways, and there are 4 different ways: sort of research, innovation, corporate work, and reporting work. In terms of research, typically this is trying to think about the system. I wouldn't claim it's systemic system thinking, but think about the system. Think about the extent to which sustainable development is becoming common currency, perhaps replacing or at least supplementing money. And then think about the extent to which the Sustainable Development Goals are a critical way of defining and determining that commitment to sustainable development. We've done that on our own account with business in the community. We've done it for DCMS as they think about their contribution to the VNR that's coming up. Acronyms for everybody, obviously. And I think that my sort of conclusion from all of that is, things are moving really quite slowly. So I read a little bit of the introductory bits to summaries to some of the roundtables this afternoon, and they were pretty positive about what had gone before, about the contribution of large business to the SDGs. I think that research shows that things are relatively slow. I mean, one stat on that was, I think that what we called a champion, which was somebody who really espoused sustainable development, put it at the heart of some of the strategic choices, and then used the SDGs to sort of define and determine that commitment. We had less than a sixth of organizations. That was out of the FTSE 100, the 100 biggest private businesses and 60 select investors. Less than a sixth of them really you could call out as champions. So I think that the challenge, or potentially, if I had to choose one challenge through that work that I would like collective intelligence to address, it would probably be the myopia of people who are one down from typically CXO. And it's not necessarily a big organization, but one down from the top level. When we did an awareness survey, and this was reasonably extensive probing on the understanding of the SDGs, you've got about 50% at board level who sort of fully understand what the SDGs sort of are about and how they could benefit and align to them. You've probably got 50% of graduates coming in who've also got a good understanding, a good handle of what they are, and know that they're 17 and not 170, for instance. The bit in the middle is a big challenge. And so my single desire challenge for collective intelligence in that sort of broader system that comes through from that research will be, how do we improve the awareness and the understanding of the middle management, the person who sits on the P&L, the profit and loss, the person who is baked into an existing business model. Very often that business model might not be fit for purpose, but it's definitely creating a schism or conflict in that person's mind between how that business works and makes money and how it operates and exists in a world. and sustainable development. So collective intelligence needs to help us address that. The second bit, a sort of lighter story, is around innovation. So we've spent 3 years working with Unleash, which is a big innovation platform, initially sponsored by the Carlsberg Foundation. Got the UNDP involved in it as well. We get about 1,000 people coming in from different parts of the world. And under 34, obviously not me, entrepreneurs, students, people, employees in some cases, all coming in to do SDG-themed innovation. So you run them through a week's program. You then have 2-3 days of funders, sponsors, and other NGOs coming in who might be able to coach and develop them. So a program which initially I thought was too disparate, too fragmented to really work, has now running into its 3rd year. It's beginning to pick up critical mass. It's coming up with some really interesting ideas. And one part of that now is that we've got running again for the 3rd year for those new ideas, but we've also got an accelerator track, which is taking ideas from the 1st and 2nd year and ramping them up. So that's sort of dead exciting, massive enthusiasm. Everyone involved loves it. It's now driving into a UNDP-sponsored program in small and medium-sized enterprises in Denmark, which Gina and I have just been chatting about. And the idea there is that that will get rolled out internationally after 2 years in Denmark. In terms of that, so it's clear that the excitement, the ability to generate great ideas, the ability to, at least in the initial stages, foster, particularly with some form of collective intelligence, is excellent. I think the big challenge there is getting those to the next level. So it's all about connections and connectivity. How do you get people not just to go back to their countries having a great idea, not to do 6 weeks of trying to find funding, failing and moving back to their day jobs. How do we make those connections rapidly and cleanly? How can collective intelligence really form and foster that innovative capability? 2 minutes left. So the third bit is really around working with corporates rather like the readout, trying to get them to think about the SDGs, think about sustainable development, put that at the forefront of their purpose. And we really push the SDGs as part of that. So that's a bit about inspiring them. That's helping them re-articulate what they're trying to achieve. That's embedding it in their organization. And that's measuring and managing it to value. In my dreams, these would be large, transformational, purpose-led projects where you're taking large organizations and reorientating them to put sustainable development and their role in society at the forefront. Typically, it hasn't been. It's been fragmented, a little bit of articulation, some stimulation, a bit of measuring and monitoring work. All interesting, all exciting, generally with a lot of goodwill in the organization, but relatively fragmented. My big ask there for collective intelligence is how might we harness collective intelligence to help big organizations understand that the change challenge in this instance it can be shared, can be simplified, is not negotiable. Because I think what happens is people see this as a huge change on top of change they're already experiencing because of whatever, digital, something else. And it just becomes one too many things as opposed to an organizing construct to simplify things. So that was my challenge. My final one is around reporting. So we do a bit of work on reporting. I do believe, we talked about currency when we're doing the research. How do we make this currency? We need to understand better what we're talking about. We need to be able to report on the impact that we have, not the outputs, not the outcomes, but the impact that we have on the stakeholders we're trying to influence. Really, really important, very difficult. Lots of people do it in some shape or form. We obviously are auditors, and so we assure some of the funds that do this, for instance, but it is relatively nascent. ESG, environmental, social and governance reporting, is well developed, as Steve well knows, but we're talking about building on that, furthering that to report on the impact on a small number of themes, so intentional impact on your stakeholders. And very often, or if not always, it goes beyond the boundary of what you actually have within your organization, so it requires collective intelligence to facilitate their reporting on an ongoing dynamic basis, unless it's going to be incredibly expensive. So the big challenge, I think, for that reporting piece, which investors are looking for, which corporates are trying to get to, so everybody can begin to communicate the value they bring, not just in monetary value, but also in terms of societal value. So the big challenge or the big hope that collective intelligence, I think, could help address, which we've got to think about, I suppose, is bringing transparency. Gina, you talked about the four parts of Nesta's sort of approach to collective intelligence. And I like that because I think that stating the problem, getting the proper framework, this is what we're trying to do as an organization. We've got this framework around SDGs and targets. How on earth do we connect them to make sense of this in a way that other people understand, that we can update on an ongoing basis, that we can demonstrate that we improve against on a year-by-year basis, is really testing. And with that, that's the end of it. 4 challenges. I did say there was a segue to Steve, because I think that sort of marshalling of data and collective intelligence might be something that Steve's going to talk about.